There's one topic that I didn't discuss in class, and it comes up in our reading in the OpenStax textbook in Chapter 5 on elasticity, but it's a little bit beyond what I'd expect the average student to really be on top of. But it's a really, really important area of study, and I know some of you are struggling with the class, but I also know that some of you are really rocking it and might be ready for a little bit of extra thinking and extra tools. So I thought I'd present the material on analyzing taxes, A, and then B, on discussing the incidence of tax, the economic incidence of taxes, and the relationship with elasticity of the economic incidence of taxes here in this screencast. So I've resurrected our prune market example, and just for ease of diagrammatic analysis, I'm going to suppose that there's a $3 per pound. It's a really big tax on prunes. And again, this is not that anybody would ever tax prunes at that high rate, but sales taxes typically run from 5%. California, I think some counties add on some, so they get some places where it's up toward 10%, but nobody would tax it at $3 per pound for a good that would normally sell at $4 a pound. Anyway, let's proceed. Just again noting that this is chosen for analytical convenience, not realism. All right, the way you analyze a tax, students want to start shifting curves. Oh, if it's on buyers, demand curves shifts less because now buyers have to pay this tax, or if it's on sellers, supply curve shifts left. And really that's, you can do that. Some textbooks present it that way, but it's actually not a great way to do it because it obscures the point that the incidence of taxes, who pays what share of taxes, has nothing to do with from whom you collect the tax. So the way I prefer to analyze taxes is both easier and makes the central point of economic analysis of such taxes that are on a per unit of a good exchanged in a market. The central point, one of the key points of this analysis, is that the way buyers and sellers split a tax has nothing to do with whether the tax is collected from buyers or sellers. So it's a $3 tax. The way we would analyze a $3 tax is to realize, what a tax does, it creates a difference between what a buyer pays for a pound and what the seller receives. That's what a tax does. We call that a wedge. So to analyze this tax graphically, the algebraic analysis of a tax is completely analogous to this technique. Anyway, to analyze a tax graphically, you just look for the place where the vertical distance between what the buyer pays for a given quantity of prunes and what the seller receives is exactly equal to the size of the tax here, $3. And lo and behold, you see why I chose this tax. We see that only at a quantity of 100 million pounds exchanged per year does the vertical distance between the price buyers pay, now the price buyers pay and the price sellers receive is different because of this tax. The government takes this tax away. So buyers would pay $5 and sellers would receive just $2 a pound. And the difference goes to the government, and that's how we analyze the economic effect of a tax. And notice there's some deadweight loss. This deadweight loss, surplus that would have accrued to buyers and sellers if we had not taxed this market, but that doesn't accrue because we did. All right, well, now let's move on to the economic incidence of this tax. So the economic incidence of this tax, notice that we have this tax, buyers pay $5, which is $3 higher than what sellers receive, $2, and that's the economic impact of the tax. We refer to economic incidence as answering the question, who pays what share of the tax? We usually express this in percentage terms. Sometimes you might express it in dollars division of the tax. But the critical feature is, notice this was a $3 tax, and students often say, oh, well, the price was $4 a pound. Without a tax, it must be $7 a pound with a tax. Well, not true at all. Notice that this tax has driven the price the price buyers pay up to $5, just up by $1, and the price sellers receive down to $2. So the tax has been shared by buyers and sellers, and the increase in the price buyers pay is less than the full amount of the tax. Only if demand is perfectly inelastic will buyers pay the full amount of the tax. You can work that case out on your own to make sure you're following this. Well, to figure out what share buyers pay, we just look at the new price minus the old price, the price that would have prevailed without the tax, and divide it by the size of the tax and multiply by 100. It's just the percentage of the tax that buyers pay. And here we notice that price was 4, it went up to 5, so the P1 minus P0 is 1, and then the size of the tax was 3, 1/3 is the share of the tax in proportionate terms. We multiply that by 100 to get the answer that buyers pay 33.33333% of the tax. And what sellers pay, the easiest way to figure out what sellers pay is just 100 minus buyers' share, buyers' percentage, or 1 minus buyer's proportion, if you want to do it that way. And now we see that sellers pay 66.67% of the tax. Now, why did sellers pay more than buyers paid? Well, it's because in my example, it's not a particularly realistic example either, because we know demand for agricultural commodities like prunes is probably pretty price inelastic. But I just pulled a formula out of my head for a supply that happened to be steeper at every point, actually, but steeper than the demand curve at the market outcome. So it's going to turn out that sellers have a lower elasticity of supply than buyers have elasticity of demand. Therefore, when the price goes up with the tax, buyers are going to say, hey, I'm not going to eat any prunes, I'll go eat raisins, or buy a over-the-counter laxative, or do whatever. But I'm going to go do something else. So by switching away from prunes and going and doing something else, buyers can escape the tax and they end up not paying much of the tax. Well, sellers, on the other hand, they have the lower elasticity of demand. Well, geez, I got my prune orchard planted. I'm not going to go rip it up, at least not immediately. And so I'm sort of stuck here selling prunes to market. I can't escape this tax. So boom, sellers end up paying 2/3 of the tax. There's an interesting thing going on in Oregon. I probably will reuse this screencast, but this is the fall of 2015, September 26th, 2015. Anyway, article in the Oregonian today, I'll post it to our Moodle page. There is a proposal being pushed by unions to put this tax on the ballot that's going to be a tax on corporations. But the critics of this tax, among other critiques, they say, okay, one, sellers are going to not do business in Oregon. Maybe so, maybe not. Oregon's a pretty big market to walk away from, even though we're small relative to the country. But the real critique of the tax is that this is a sales tax, just disguised as a tax on corporations. And that critique is actually absolutely right, that the tax would assess a certain percentage of company sales that happen in Oregon. The tax would take a certain percent of those sales. So instead of a tax on buyers, say a sales tax of 5%, it's going to be on sellers. I think it's 3%, something like that. But anyway, they're going to look at revenues that firms make based, selling certain types of products, and they're going to take 3% of that as tax. That's called an excise tax. It's in percentage terms, not in this $3 per pound. Instead, it's X percent of a pound. 3% of a pound in the case of the proposal in Oregon. But anyway, it is. It just happens to be assessed on sellers, not on buyers, but it is exactly the same as a sales tax, and the economic effect we'd expect would be very, very similar to the impact of a sales tax. And that's why I frankly would support it. It's Oregon has no sales tax, and our revenues go up during good times and down during recessions. And the problem is that the need for government services is relatively low during good times, but relatively high during bad times, and Oregon isn't allowed to borrow, and they're not allowed to keep a rainy day fund, so it ends up meaning that we have to just cut the heck out of school budgets in particular in Oregon during recessionary times. And the other thing Oregon does, in addition to undermining its own revenue base by voting down any proposal for a sales tax, and then they voted through very strict limits on property taxes along the lines of Prop 13 in California. Anyway, I think it was Measure 5 in Oregon that did that. But anyway, so Oregon has tied its hands with revenues to be entirely dependent almost on income taxes. And then we also vote in this state, we, not me, because I'm not a big fan of them, but there is just never a mandatory sentencing law that voters in the state of Oregon don't pass. So we've mandated all these prison expenditures that can't shrink in times of recession. We've cut our property and sales taxes that are somewhat immune to business cycles. They're not so pro-cyclical as income taxes are by any stretch. And here we end up having to cut school budgets by just drastic amounts during business cycle downturns, which means we aren't going to educate our citizens during those times. And luckily we have a place in prison for them when they can't make a living on their own. I'm sorry to editorialize here, but it's hard to avoid it when you look at Oregon tax policy, which is amazingly messed up.